Twilight bled across the sky, the fading sun casting a crimson glow over Summerhall as the preparations neared completion. The courtyard had grown unnaturally still. 7 dragon eggs for each of the 7 lay in a star formation at the heart of the stone platform, their shells gleaming faintly in the dying light. Around them, the flames of the wildfire in the bronze cauldron flickered green, waiting for the moment they would be unleashed. Sir Duncan the Tall watched from the edge of the platform, his mouth dry, his stomach knotted with a fear he dared not show. His armor felt heavier than it ever had before, the weight of his oaths pressing down on him. But it wasn't just the armor that made him feel this way. The weirwood loomed at the far end of the courtyard, its bone-white bark stark against the gathering dark. Red leaves rustled softly in the wind. Dunk had never liked the trees, but the king had insisted. Beside the weirwood stood the wood's witch, her ragged cloak blending into the shadows. The dwarf woman was Jenny's friend from the Riverlands. It was her who had insisted Egg connect with the tree, she who had spoken of the visions in its heart. But Dunk had never trusted her. There was something about her presence that felt like a shadow lurking at the edge of his mind. "Sir Duncan," came a familiar voice, cutting through the stillness. Dunk turned to see Egg, King Aegon, with lines of worry etched deep into his face. His violet eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. Dunk could see it, the same madness that had consumed others in the Targaryen line. The time has come. Dunk's throat tightened. He looked past Egg to the dragon eggs lying before the cauldron of wildfire. "Egg, are you sure this is the way?" His voice was low, but the worry in it was clear. Egg's gaze shifted to the 7 eggs, and for a moment something softer passed across his face. "There is no other way, old friend. The realm needs dragons. The realm needs fire. And I need to fulfill my birthright." From behind them, Maester Corso shuffled forward, holding the ancient scroll that had guided them to this moment. His hands trembled as he unrolled it, his eyes flicking nervously to the pyromancers gathered around the cauldron. "Your Grace," he rasped, "we are prepared. But remember, the magic we are attempting is dangerous, unpredictable. The old Valyrians wielded fire as a weapon, but it could just as easily consume us." Egg nodded solemnly. "Then let it consume us if it must. For the dragon, for the realm, fire and blood." Dunk wanted to protest, but the king had already turned away, his focus now on the weirwood tree. He walked toward it slowly, his hand brushing the hilt of his sword. As he approached the tree, a crow, a great black bird, alighted on one of the pale branches, its beady eyes following Egg's every move. It cawed once, a harsh sound that echoed across the courtyard. Dunk stared at the crow, unease crawling up his spine. The wood's witch stepped forward, her bony hands raised toward the weirwood, her voice soft but insistent, her eyes closing as if in prayer. Egg closed his eyes, his fingers brushing the weirwood bark. The wind seemed to die for a moment, and Dunk could feel it. Something stirring in the air, something ancient and dark. Egg stood unmoving, his body rigid as if he had become part of the tree itself. Then his lips parted, and he whispered, "I see them. I see the dragons. I see fire." Suddenly, Egg turned back to the platform, his face pale but determined. "The flames are ready. We begin." Maester Corso nodded, signaling to the pyromancers. They gathered around the cauldron, their green robes catching the light of the fire, their faces hidden beneath hoods. As one, They began to chant, their voices rising in a harsh, guttural harmony. The sound was chilling, a song of death and birth, an invocation to forces Dunk could not understand. The wildfire in the cauldron began to hiss, its green flames licking hungrily at the air. The pyromancers continued their chant, their voices growing louder, more frenzied, until it was all Dunk could hear, an eerie, unnatural music that twisted and churned in his gut. Egg stepped forward, his hand outstretched toward the flames. The fire seemed to reach for him in return, tendrils of green licking up his arm. But they did not burn him. Dunk's heart hammered in his chest as he watched his king. The wildfire's flames surged higher, and the pyromancer's chant grew more frantic, their voices now tinged with fear. And then it happened. The flames shot up, violent and ravenous, engulfing the cauldron in a blinding flash of green light. The pyromancers screamed, but their voices were swallowed by the fire as it devoured them, their bodies turning to ash in moments. Dunk staggered back, shielding his eyes, but he could still hear Egg, his voice rising above the roar of the flames. The wildfire surged, spilling out of the cauldron, racing toward the 7 dragon eggs. Dunk could only watch, helpless, as the green flames wrapped around the eggs, consuming them in their fury. The weirwood tree groaned, its pale branches twisting as if in pain, the crow screeching as it flew off into the night. But there were no dragons, only fire. The flames did not die. They raged higher and higher, devouring everything they touched. Summerhall's stone walls began to crack and crumble under the heat, and the eggs began to crack too. But instead of life, they spilled forth only smoke and ruin. Egg's voice faltered, his hands shaking. No, the realm, Egg whispered, his voice faint now, lost in the roar of the inferno. And then Sir Duncan the Tall could only watch as the fire claimed his friend, his king. The flames had transformed Summerhall into a hell of green lights. Wildfire licked hungrily at the walls, devouring stone, wood, and flesh alike. The air reeked of sulfur and death, and Sir Duncan the Tall moved through it all, slower now with age, his once great strength fading under the weight of the inferno. Each breath was a battle, his lungs choking on the acrid smoke. But there were still lives to save. Egg was gone. The boy, his king, his friend, had walked into the flames, madness glinting in his violet eyes, his hopes for dragons consuming him long before the wildfire ever did. Dunk had seen it happen, seen the way Egg's pale face had vanished into the blaze. The king's last words, a whispered promise. For the dragons, for the realm, it had been a dream, a desperate gamble that had claimed more than just his life. Now, Dunk could only hear the crackle of flames, the roar of death. There were no dragons, only destruction. Dunk gritted his teeth, the fire gnawing at his skin through his armor, but he pushed forward, his oaths the only thing keeping his weary body upright. He had failed Egg, failed to stop this madness, but others might still be saved. He owed them that much. Through the haze of smoke, he saw them, Prince Jaehaerys and Princess Shaera, crouched near a crumbling pillar, eyes wide with terror. Shaera clutched her husband, soot streaking their faces, fear making her knuckles white as the fire crept closer. "Sir Duncan!" Jaehaerys rasped, his voice hoarse, broken. He tried to stand but stumbled, the heat sapping his strength. "We need to..." "There's no time for words," Dunk said, his voice a rasp of iron. He bent low, scooping the prince up in one arm, pulling Shaera to her feet with the other. We're leaving. Now. The fire closed in, hissing and spitting, but Dunk pressed on, dragging them toward the courtyard, where the air was thinner, clearer. Each step was a struggle, the ground beneath his feet cracking as wood and stone buckled. Jaehaerys stumbled behind him, hacking out a cough, but Dunk did not let him fall. There was no turning back now. There was only forward. Then he heard it, faint at first, swallowed by the roar of the flames, a cry from deeper within the dying castle. Dunk's heart froze. Rhaella. She was still inside, in labor, trapped, and Aerys, the young prince, was with her. Dunk cursed under his breath. He couldn't leave them to burn. "Go!" he growled to Jaehaerys and Shera, shoving them toward the open air. "Get to safety. I'll fetch the others." Jaehaerys hesitated, the burden of his crown hanging heavy. But Shera tugged at his sleeve, her voice trembling. "Hurry, my love," she urged. "Sir Duncan, save them." Dunk nodded, grim, and turned back into the flames. His body protested with every step, muscles screaming, lungs burning with each poisoned breath. But he pressed forward. The hallway was a death trap, crumbling and spitting fire from every crevice. But Dunk could still hear Rhaella's cries. Finally, he found them. Rhaella lay on the cold stone, her body twisting with the pain of childbirth, her face slick with sweat and soot. Beside her knelt Aerys, hands shaking as he tried to comfort her, his pale face ghostly in the firelight. "Sir Duncan," Aerys cried, his voice quaking. "The baby. It's coming. But the fire." "Get her up," Dunk ordered, his voice rough but steady. He knelt beside the queen, lifting her as gently as his trembling arms allowed. Rhaella groaned, the agony of labor stealing her breath, but she clung to Dunk as he hoisted her up. Aerys scrambled to follow, his eyes wide with terror. "Can we have to," Dunk said, though he was far from certain. The fire was everywhere, alive, ravenous, swallowing everything. But there was no choice. Dunk had sworn an oath to protect them, and he would hold to it, even if it cost him his life. With Rhaella in his arms and Aerys stumbling at his side, Dunk moved as fast as he could, his legs trembling under the weight of it all. The fire was a living thing now, snapping and growling, as if the gods themselves had unleashed a beast upon Summerhall. But Dunk kept going, a man bound to duty, even in the face of death. They neared the exit when he saw her, a small, ghostly figure standing amidst the wreckage, untouched by the flames. The ghost of High Heart. Her white hair billowed around her like a halo, her eyes clouded, but filled with a grief that pierced Dunk's soul. She had come, as she always did, drawn by visions only she could see. The flames. They were always coming, she whispered, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the roar of the wildfire. But you will save them. Dunk had no time for prophecy. There were still lives to save. He bent down, lifting the small woman with one arm while keeping Rhaella close with the other. The ghost weighed nothing at all, her eyes already distant. With a final surge of strength, Dunk pushed through the burning door into the courtyard. Aerys followed, his eyes hollow, and behind them, the castle groaned, collapsing in on itself, flames licking at the night sky. Jaehaerys and Shera were waiting, their faces wet with tears, hope flickering in their eyes. Dunk fell to one knee, laying Rhaella gently on the grass as her body writhed with the final pangs of childbirth. Aerys knelt beside her, trembling, and the future screamed to be born. But Dunk was not finished. He turned back, eyes drawn to the inferno, where Summerhall's bones cracked and crumbled. The wildfire burned green and bright, devouring all that had been. And in that moment, Dunk saw her, tall, silver-haired, a vision through the flames. She stood among dragons, her eyes fierce with fire, and the beasts roared, their scales shimmering in the deadly light. Dunk's heart stirred, peace settling over him like the cool touch of water. The dragons had come at last. Not for Egg, not for Summerhall. They had come for her, and as the wildfire consumed him, and Dunk smiled, his duty was done.